Welcome to Focus on Leadership podcast. My guest today is actually someone that I have wanted to interview for quite some time because I've always found him very fascinating, deep, and insightful. The conversations that we've had when he was going through our Leadership St. Louis program always leaves me wanting more because I'm thinking, what questions is he thinking and that he's asking? So without any further ado, please join me in welcoming Dr. Yusef Scoggin, Leadership St. Louis alum and also Executive Director of Delmar Divine. Welcome.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm happy to be here.
Yes, it's great to have you here. Thank you for joining us. And for the wider audience who haven't had the pleasure or the privilege of meeting you or knowing your story, can you share a little bit about your personal and professional journey? Because I feel that it's instructive for our listeners because you've made some, I would say maybe strategic pivots that has brought you to leading at Delmar Divine.
You know, that's an interesting intro, and I appreciate the time and the conversation here today. What is sort of intriguing about something that you just mentioned, the word you said, intentional pivots, and I would say it's really sort of divinely purposed moves. Not all of them were calculated decisions, but it really starts from early on.
Tell me more about that early on.
Yeah, so
parenting.
Yeah, I was born and raised here in St. Louis.
Awesome.
I have amazing parents who've aged well, generally speaking, and they really pushed my sister and I to do our absolute best, explore a whole host of things. We were exposed to a lot over our period of time. And of course, the high school question always comes into mind.
Yes, where did you go to high school?
Education was a big piece.
Mm-hmm.
And I went to Metro High School
Awesome.
in the city of St. Louis. So while there's often thoughts about educational opportunities and the challenges that exist there, Metro is an amazing school. It did wonders for so many and
Yes.
still does to this day. But then after that, I went to Xavier University in New Orleans because
excellent school.
Absolutely had a very strong interest in becoming a physician, primarily because two of my maternal uncles were schizophrenic. My mother's the oldest of 8, and so I witnessed some of the challenges associated with schizophrenia and mental health challenges growing up. And that really pushed me to say, how can I help? How can I support in different ways? One of my experiences with one of my uncles who was schizophrenic, who's now passed away, is him attempting to commit suicide just because of a bad reaction to an antipsychotic medication.
Wow.
I quickly realized, however, after undergrad and then when I entered into medical school at Mizzou, my first rotation in my third year of medical school was psychiatry. And I realized...
That was intentional.
It kind of was, but
fortuitous.
I think it was fortuitous. It was one of these things to slap you in your face, say, this is either going to be it or it's not going to be it.
Mm-hmm.
And you have an opportunity throughout the rest of your time here to kind of figure out something different if that's where you want to go. And so my first rotation was insightful in a variety of ways. One, it ultimately determined that I did not want to do psychiatry because I didn't see it in the same way that I'd saw it before. Many of the medical skills that you might learn, you don't really apply in the same way when you're a psychiatrist. So labs and things of that nature, all of that gets worked up by your primary internists, things of that nature, hospitalists. They're really going to stabilize those factors. You don't go to the psychiatric floor until all of those are pretty much stabilized.
It's a process.
And that sort of was a bit off-putting because I had interest in other parts of the human body. But there was an experience doing that rotation that really slapped me in the face as well. And that was this sort of cultural competency element. And
Tell me more.
I had a gentleman, and again, Mizzou's med school is in the middle of Missouri, and so you get folks from all throughout the state, east, west, rural parts of the community as well. And so we had a 91-year-old African-American male who was transferred in from a nursing facility, and he was having what they deemed as a psychotic break. He had a diagnosis of paranoid schizophrenia, and so I went in and I would see him in the morning, and we'd have discussions, and he was having some delusions, et cetera, thinking there were people in particular spaces that weren't. And so I just listened, however. Instead of writing off what his commentary was, I just listened. And I remember one morning him saying, as I'm sitting by his bedside, "Oh, watch out, the Klan is coming. The Klan is coming. Watch, they're going to come get us. They're getting us. Let's go. Let's be safe." And that stuck with me as I went back to write up my notes before we had our ultimate morning rounds with the internal medicine with the psychiatry residents as well as the attendings. And so while I'm sitting there in this morning discussion, they were going patient by patient. "Oh, let's adjust this med, let's adjust that med. Oh, this person is ready for discharge," so on and so forth. And it sort of hit home. I said, "Hold on, what about this patient?" I said, "Well, as opposed to just thinking about the medical side, is it possible that this African-American man from the Boot Heel of Missouri, who essentially grew up in the 1920s and 1930s, very dark-complected black man, might not have had actual real experience with the Klan and or racism during his time. And maybe this is not paranoid schizophrenia. Maybe this is a flashback to an experience he had, and maybe he also has dementia going on." And everyone in the room looked over and said, and the attending in particular said, "That's a very, very good point. We never thought about that." And so that adjusted the way that they handled that patient, and ultimately he was discharged in a way that made more sense as opposed to just giving him a bunch of medications.
Right.
But I thought what was most intriguing was when I went back to type up the notes is the head resident came over and he said, "What's the KKK?"
Oh.
And I thought that was interesting because he was nodding his head as if he understood and agreed and could sort of understand the nuance of what I was describing as an alternative understanding as to why this patient was having these challenges. But I understood when I got back to the room, he had no knowledge of the cultural dynamics that could be associated. And so that sort of fast forwards into my general thought process of my career and my work, is to not just think about it through the practitioner lens, but ultimately understand the whole human and what's possibly beneath the surface that if you don't have that sort of intersectional understanding, you very well may miss.
That is so true. And there's a lot out there now in terms of research that talks about the importance of cultural competency, not just for medical professionals, but for people across, different sectors. So that's a very poignant story. I'm glad you were there.
Yeah.
Otherwise, he probably would have never been discharged, and the medications would have been ramped up in a way that is not helpful for him. So you mentioned that you, thank you for sharing that, that you went to Xavier. I remember years ago when I worked for an institution and would fly out to talk to Xavier students to study abroad. A lot of the Xavier students wanted to go to medical school.
Absolutely.
And so to hear that that was your pathway to getting there and also coming back home and staying here, what would you say keeps you here in St. Louis?
I think, for most folks, and certainly for me as well, is family. Family was a key component, but I also saw opportunity here. I had opportunities to live elsewhere, a lot of the places that are thriving, growing populations, where there are a lot of opportunities, places like Atlanta, Dallas. I have a lot of friends in all of those locations, and I have a lot of family in those places. But being here in St. Louis and really thinking through how I could make an impact and make an impression on the various things that I saw coming up, some of which were the same and some of them weren't as favorable.
Right.
And so how might I create a different dynamic? I think if everyone leaves, then the reality is a doomed one. Right. I think it's important for us, particularly who have an investment here, to really see the value here, because many folks who come from elsewhere do realize the value and they're able to make a significant impact and really climb that ladder. And so I wanted to be a part of the change that I think is coming to St. Louis. It's slower than I think many would anticipate and expect, but I believe we are on the right track.
And I do not doubt that. I would say that you serving in the capacity of executive director at Delmar Divine is great because Delmar Divine, from my perspective, is a powerful symbol of transformation for our region. Could you describe for our listeners what the mission has been and perhaps even the transformation?
Yeah, absolutely. So Delmar Divine obviously was really a twist on the Delmar Divide. So there's been countless articles, books, as well as just walk outside of your door in various parts of the city of St. Louis, and you see the difference in investment south of Delmar and divestments north of Delmar. And that's led to all sorts of outcomes. Certainly when you look at Jason Purnell's work, Richard Rothstein's publications that talk about the history of St. Louis, redlining, et cetera, it has really made profound challenges for St. Louis, and generations have been lost as a result. And so the founder of the Delmar Divine, Maxine Clark, was very intentional around changing some of these dynamics. She's been involved in education. Her and her husband have been philanthropic in so many ways and wanted to make investments. And so being able to make an investment in a shuttered full city block, which was a hospital, a place for caring at one point, and actually being able to transform it into a epicenter for nonprofits and other businesses that create real innovation, collaboration, and transformation. That's what the Delmar Divine is all about. So we have over 24,000 nonprofits in St. Louis, and so
Just 24,000. The way you said that, yes, a
right,
smidgen.
right,
Yes.
and it's quite different when you have nonprofit versus a for-profit business. Nonprofits don't necessarily always have to go through the same due diligence that for-profits in terms of doing market analysis, things
True.
of that nature. And so you have a plethora of them. Doesn't that not mean they're always doing the same level of work? And there's likely opportunity for collaboration. There's also the sort of rut that any number of organizations, for-profit or nonprofits, can get into, and that is doing things as they've always been done.
Sure.
And given that we want to really change St. Louis in a variety of ways, knowing that the status quo, what has been, is not where we need to be, and the world is changing rapidly, and that's irrespective of things like AI, which are just changing things in such a rapid pace. It's important that we do things differently, and innovation is a key component. So at the Delmar Divine, we have 42 businesses, 36 of them are nonprofit.
Wow.
And those nonprofits really fall into three different categories: healthcare, education, and community development. And so really, when you tie that back to my initial orientation and career path, although it sounds non-traditional, and certainly my path has been somewhat non-traditional, having served in government in a few fashions, it really brings together all those social determinants of health that are critical, that I saw in some of my patients when I was studying and doing research in sickle cell disease. And a number of patients who weren't doing as well on a medical protocol as we would have assumed them to be, and it was based upon a lot of things that were happening outside of the healthcare system. Back then we didn't have terminology for it, but now we know it as a social determinants of health.
Right.
And so at the Delmar Divine, that's really what we focus on, is really allowing for the nonprofits to work, again, in a collaborative ways, understand the intersectionality of the lives and the experience of the patients and the clients that they see, so that we can ultimately remedy them, not just for the individual, not just for the household, but for communities at large.
It sounds like you are the connective tissue for all those nonprofits to be working collaboratively together. And I've been at Delmar Divine for a number of what I would characterize as cross-pollination that is happening with the different nonprofits so they can do more for the greater good.
Yes.
So I would say, congrats on, continuing to execute on the original vision of transformation that Maxine has there. So let's talk a little bit in terms of the different nonprofits. You have a sizable number of them, including perhaps even some corporate partners. What would you say it takes to have true collective impact?
First, you have to have a will. So this whole idea that where there's a will, there's a way. First, you have to have a will. And so often we sort of get into the idea again, let's do as we've always done, or it's too difficult to shift. Oh, I'm not sure that I want to reveal my data. I'm not sure that I even want to ask the questions to look into my data. And so you have to have a will, and you have to have a mutually symbiotic sort of incentive for engaging in that work of collaboration.
Right.
And so collective impact requires people coming together. Right?
Mm-hmm.
That's essentially the core of collective. And to make an impact means not just performing activities, not just doing things that ultimately are able to count sort of numbers like widgets, so to speak, but ultimately understanding how you're making transformative interventions that are going to lead to a better outcome, not just in the short run, but for the long haul. And so we have a number of nonprofits at the Delmar Divide. That's the reason why they ultimately locate there, is because they're in the spirit of changing things, being able to innovate, being able to speak to their peers and their partners around ways that they can really pull the dollars together and make them stretch even further. How they can get additional supports within the Delmar Divide, whether that's through trainings, hearing about topics that they might not otherwise be able to, or they'd have to travel for long distances for. We have over 20 conference rooms. We host all sorts of events. That allows for folks to really get exposed. And then that brings in others that say, wow, I had no idea. I couldn't tell you how many times I hear this. Although we've been published and there's been so many write-ups and discussions around the Delmar Divide, there's still a lot to be learned about what is happening there and ultimately the outcomes and impact. I can go through the laundry list of things that are sort of documented in our annual impact report, but it's really centered around the environment, the culture that we have there that's allowing for these nonprofits to work together in ways that create collective impact, that ask tough questions, that pushes one another to do better, and ultimately is centered around understanding what is going on in community and centering your work in that.
That's amazing. Can you highlight perhaps one or two successful impact stories that will bring it home to people in terms of the level of work that you've been able to accomplish?
So the beauty of YIMI and Focus St. Louis is that when you all put together discussions, you make sure that you don't miss someone. So I'll caveat.
Yes, no, I understand.
Caveat
yes.
my comment by
we don't have time for everyone, just a few. But I understand.
We've had amazing first and unique nonprofits at our location. So Dr. Punch founded an organization called Power 4 STL, which has two entities up under it. One is called the BRIC, that stands for Bullet Related Injury Clinic, and the other is called the T, and it's an outreach program for those who are vulnerable. And they really focus on a number of things. People often think about gunshot victims, unfortunately, only through the lens of the particular injury that they suffer. But they never ultimately ask the questions around how did this happen? Ultimately, what trauma have you experienced that's not only led to this, but if I don't address and counsel you on, you might find yourself back in a similar situation or worse. And so the BRIC is really focused on that trauma-related counseling, not just the bullet itself, but ultimately the manifestation of what that bullet sort of means to the household. And so Dr.
deep.
Punch, Jamila Owens-Todd, Dr. Jamala Owens-Todd, both of them have been instrumental in bringing forward that organization in ways that has been transformative to the patients that they see. They've done a lot of work in the recovery after the tornado on May 16th as well, in addressing some of the trauma related to the damages and the loss of one's home and your community. And so they've done a number of things. They've also put on symposiums, and so they're doing things nationally to support spreading the word and that model across this country. And so we're looking forward to the continued impact there, and they're still growing, and so we're happy about that. They're one example.
Okay.
We have another organization that Kate Kearns actually runs called I Thrive.
Oh, yes. Kate is an alum of Focus.
Absolutely.
Yes.
And Kate is doing amazing work, has a second mobile vehicle that's allowing for young people to get glasses on the spot. we often think about our young people as before the taping ran here, we talked about your child.
Yes.
And I think about my son who's 13, but several years ago, you have to do that early childhood eye exam, ear exam, all
It's
of
important.
those things.
Right.
And there are a lot of communities where that's missed, or oftentimes they're in school settings and people are questioning academic achievement and not understanding whether the child can actually see,
Right.
can hear. And so I Thrive is doing amazing work. They had an amazing health fair, so not just highlighting their work, but bringing in a number of partners. Again, collaboration that was held at the Delmar Divide just about 2 months ago, a month and a half ago. And so we're happy about the work that they're able to accomplish as well. So those are just a couple examples.
Yes, I know you can't talk about everyone,
34 others
but
I can
yes.
chime in on. But
yeah, so the 34 others know that we see you, we hear you, we know that work is being done in ways that are important and significant. So you mentioned something about trauma, and I just want to dive into that because we hear trauma a lot. You know, you mentioned it within the context of the recent unfortunate tornadoes. What can you tell us about trauma in our region?
Trauma is experienced in a number of ways. We often think about it in the most dramatic forms, those that can be visualized on camera. We're so tied into our social media. Folks are picking up their phones, shooting videos all the time, showing the most traumatic, the most violent, potentially, experiences that people are suffering. But trauma can be also in the more subtle ways. It can be in the ways that people are interfacing within their community, their schools. So we're thinking about bullying. We're thinking about ways in which we have hostile work environments. We have trauma that's associated with divestment. So when we think about why is the Delmar Divide where it is, it's in order to change and actually spur the growth that we've been able to see, especially in the last many years in north of Delmar, in the West End area, in the Academy area, et cetera. And so that's traumatic. Traumatic when you are coming out. I can think about a song that I listened to. It was a rapper when I was in high school. And it had the Isley brothers on the chorus. And he said, looking out my project window, I feel so uninspired. And I think sometimes we dismiss the extent to which we are often either motivated or not motivated based upon what we're seeing in our immediate surroundings. We take for granted many things. And so when we talk about, for some of us who've never experienced some of the hardships, financial hardships, and being in communities where you don't have a lot of choice, you don't have a lot of access, we don't understand that that's traumatic. It's traumatic for a mother to have to travel miles and miss being able to get to the child's teacher's conference, and then also being possibly chastised by the school for not participating. Right, that's traumatic. Right? And that creates a great deal of guilt. And so there are all sorts of dynamics when you're suffering significant poverty and a lack of access, and a community that says they love you, but when you look all around, the resources don't indicate as much. And so that's trauma as well. And so I think we need to think about things, especially when we know we live in a capitalistic society where we put a huge amount of investments in certain areas and we don't. And I'm not saying just physically.
Right.
But I mean in terms of education and all the other social determinants of health. And so when we wonder sometimes why certain populations or individuals seem angry,
there's a reason.
There's a reason.
Right.
There's a backstory. And so, if there's nothing else that I've shared, during our discussion, is really to look deeper into who you're speaking to, what is their experience, and that's really the story of St. Louis and so many communities where you had the haves and have-nots. And so we have to look deeper. We have to understand what would it be to walk in their shoes and not be so self-centered.
Right, and making sure that they're at the table.
That's absolutely.
When any type of, whether it's an incentive, whether it's a project, whether it's a program that's being created, that their voice is in there. Because that's how you can develop a rich, program that will address these years of trauma.
Absolutely.
And it could end up, not that it could, it will change the trajectory of that family. So one of the things that we talked about before we started shooting here is around the future. What is the future of the region? Not so much what is the future. I think for the most part we know what the future of the region could be. But what are the possibilities and the opportunities that we need to keep in mind, that we need to keep on working on to make it an even better and stronger future for the generations, our children?
Mm-hmm. We have to, the possibilities are to think outside of the parochial nature.
Mm-hmm.
While we take a great deal of pride in what high school we went to, we take a great deal of pride in the neighborhoods that we live in, take good pride in sort of the clubs and associations we're connected to. That is not all that who we are. We are part of a collective. We are a part of a community, and when one part of your community is suffering significantly, it has significant effects on the rest of your community. And regions that are growing not just in population, but those populations are because opportunities there, corporations, et cetera, is because they're allowing for all of the ideas that are often rooted in one's experience and exposure to be shared and to be invested in and facilitated in the work that moves forward. So the question becomes, where does the opportunity exist? It exists in places that people have often missed, right? So we often think about, what's the new great idea? Oftentimes it's in that place, in that corner that you neglected for so long. There is a lot of interest. So when we think about economic engines in these communities, some of these communities are riddled with predatory sort of, yes. And so it's not as if there isn't capital there, right? Financial capital, but there's also intellectual capital. The question is, do they have an opportunity to share it? Do they have an opportunity to take it to the next step? And so really having access in that social network, which is another key component to not only what Focus St. Louis does, but ultimately the social determinants of health, having that sort of social capital is important to be able to have voice and be able to sort of amplify what it is that's inside of you and within those communities to actually have traction and move forward. And so the real possibility lies in the places that we are often neglecting to look.
It's hidden in plain sight.
Absolutely.
And we need to hit pause and look around.
Absolutely.
And extend an invitation and not make conversations transactional in nature.
Totally.
Wow. Very powerful there. Looks like we are wrapping up here and running out of time. I could talk to you for the rest of today, but I am curious, what and who inspires you?
So what inspires me is I'm big on faith. I'm not huge on church. I grew up in the church. I was an acolyte. I did all of the things. I was a Boy Scout in church. So church was sort of like the center point of a lot of community that I knew coming up. And my grandparents, I think about my grandmother, I can hear her voice screaming hallelujah. Right? So the Spirit is what inspires me, right? And who it is, those who have blazed the trail before. I have too many shoulders. Both my maternal and paternal grandparents came from the South. My papa and big mama both came from Arkansas.
Oh, okay.
And I recently was reacquainted with someone that I've known for many years now. We've worked on a number of things together, and we found out we're cousins.
Really?
And so we were just chatting about sort of the history there, going all the way back down to Arkansas, where the family had about 300 acres, and there's a family church, and there's a family cemetery. And I remember going there when I was a child on a family reunion. And to think about that great-grandfather coming out of slavery into owning your own land, producing a large family that have all gone on to do amazing things. And it's I think a unique experience, particularly for African Americans, where there's often been a very significant gap between what is your history, your direct pathway back to your native land. And so when I think about some of the lost component of that passageway and the resilience and the strength of my ancestors and so many that you don't even know by name, that's what inspires me to push forward. So when I think about any of the challenges of the day, they are nothing in comparison.
Right.
And so there is nothing that we cannot achieve. There is nothing that we cannot accomplish. And so it is my duty to live out through divine intervention's purpose for me even being here on earth, but also for those who've come before me to live out exactly what is intended.
And you are doing it.
I appreciate it.
You are doing it. If you could wave a magic wand, what is one thing about St. Louis today that you would change, and why?
Just one thing.
Or you can make it multiple.
If we had no choice to move away, right? So one would be the combination of governments, all three. So many folks only on city and county. I would say city, county, and St. Charles, and something that would restrict any subdivision of that, inclusive of school districts.
Okay.
Right. So not just one big government, one school district, and what I would like to see from that is us being forced to work together.
Again, going back to the heart of the work that you've always done, and that is collaboration.
Absolutely.
It's very important. And if you could have a banner that when people are driving in from anywhere of St. Louis, what would be on that banner?
Good question. That's a good question. What would that banner be? You have arrived. So, and what I mean by that is, so I would often speak about this when I was in government, in particular, is thinking about the history of St. Louis generally. St. Louis City used to be in the top 5 population cities in the country. And then that's down to less than 300,000 people now, much to the benefit of St. Louis County at the time. Now St. Louis County's population is slightly declining, much to the benefit of St. Charles County. And so my 2 questions were always, who are we running from and where are we running to? And so intersect that with this question of you have arrived, right? And just thinking through, what does arrival really mean?
Okay.
Right. And I think that would pose a lot of questions as to our whole orientation, because quite frankly, what we've done over a series of decades is sort of repeat, sort of an insane pattern that makes choices on where we invest and then what we leave behind. And we never conquer the issues that are there. So let's say you're running from a criminal element or crime. Well, that doesn't work, actually. Like, crime moves wherever the resources and opportunities might exist, right? Or you say it's education. Well, now we see a creep of issues in other educational systems all throughout the region. Most recently, St. Charles is in turmoil. It's not just the city. And at one point, it was only the city school that had challenges with accreditation. Then it was Riverview, and then it was Normandy. And so the question is, have we learned what is really at the heart of this to tackle it? Or do we just move on, establish some new so-called panacea
right.
that lasts for 20, 30 years, and you're back into the same set of circumstances. Part of this is really the focus of your entire podcast, and that's leadership.
Right.
I've heard it in so many settings. There's a lack of leadership in some parts of this community. And it's not in the sense of who has a title. Title isn't leadership.
That's correct.
It's not in the sense of who can speak eloquently. We have a number of people who can do that.
Yeah.
But it's really a function of courage. It's a courage. I mean, when we think about, circles that you're either opened, you gain access to, or you're closed to.
Right.
Yes, there's a way to go about being a disruptor that is either just too abrasive to be workable with folks.
But you need to bring people along.
You do.
Wow.
You do. And
anything we can do about the gap in leadership?
I think people just have to be courageous. I think that is one of the key elements, is for folks to speak up. I think back on our class of 2019, right? There were certainly some of us who were vocal and some of us who were very gun shy, right?
Yeah.
And that's always going to be the case. But I think the more we can at least articulate our thoughts, the more we can explore those and sort of work through that nuance of understanding, background, experience, et cetera. And I think there's an element of that, I think, that has influenced the federal political climate, which is why some people voted, I think, for Trump, is because he's raw. And he has independent wealth, so he has the easy way of just saying whatever he wants, and people just let it go.
Right.
I think for many others, maybe the same people that he is intimidating now, they're less likely to speak up because they have bills to pay, they have whatever to, and so there's a lack of leadership by many based upon the power brokers in the room. And we have to ask ourselves, what is the right thing to do? Yes, I think there is always a question of how do you do it? What's your approach? And working in government, city, county government, I understand the politics of those dynamics. So you need to be thoughtful in that way. But you have to, I think, ask yourself, what do you determine is right? What's the right thing to do? And you have to, I think, be willing to stand up for something.
And stay the course.
And stay that course. That's absolutely right. Because, whether win or fail, there are always going to be those who are going to take shots at you. And there are always going to be naysayers. One last story. I remember after my freshman year, actually it was midway through my freshman year in college. And I came back, and my father was in his bedroom, and I came in to say hey to him, and he had the little Jet magazine.
Oh, yes.
And
yeah.
Most people don't realize what that Jet magazine anymore, but the little small black publication, Jet magazine. Yeah. And he had the Jet magazine, and he said to me, he said, "Hey, son, your guy Nelly is doing big things." And I didn't think I heard him correctly. So I said, "What did you say, Dad?" And he said, "Your guy Nelly's doing great things." And then he shows me the magazine where Nelly was on the front page of it. And I said, interesting. I said, "Well, what do you know about Nelly, Daddy? What do you know about, last time I checked, you don't like rap.
Yeah.
Like, have you heard any of his albums? Have you heard any of his music, right?" And what that told me in that moment as essentially an 18, 19-year-old was what is potentially deemed to be successful will catch the attention of people in a number of ways and potentially outweigh what their initial inclination is because of the appearance of the success.
Right.
So in the same sense, when you're going through a leadership pathway, or you're trying to blaze a trail that hasn't been before, or you're trying to sort of bend the tide in a direction that people said would never happen. The Delmar Divide is one example of that. You have to keep your head focused focus.
The focus,
right?
yes, pun intended.
On that. And you have to have enough courage to see it through. The perseverance is everything. You're going to take hits. You're going to have setbacks. But you have to persevere if you're doing the right thing.
Wow, that's powerful. Okay, I love it. For whatever reason, I am seeing, like this, just, one, line sentence that says, Dr. Scoggin is all about I am possible. I am possible through the work that I do, through how I'm able to amplify the data, how I'm able to get individuals and nonprofits to collaborate, to move the needle forward in all those, health issues that are not just important to the individual and the underserved, but significantly important to the community at large. So thank you again for your work. And my audience, I have to say, wow, this is one of those interviews. There's a reason why I was looking forward to it. But I appreciate you joining us today on the Focus Leadership Podcast.
I appreciate the time. It's been a joy.
Yes.